In my opinion, guys, one of the factors that influences a season's meta is the artifact. Hell, think back when we had particle deconstruction. Fusion rifles became meta overnight. Now, we ourselves have gotten to see the artifact mods for next week's episode, Revenant. Bungie also revealed it in the reveal stream, and we went over just about all of them except for 2, which we're going to be talking about in today's video. So think of this video as a brief overview of those artifact mods, but also a call out to weapons that we believe are going to be meta with Revenant's artifact. Timestamps down below, guys, if you already know what the artifact does. But for the quick overview, first column, we have anti-barrier scout rifle, overload submachine gun, unstoppable pulse rifle, anti-barrier shotgun, which is wild, and overload breach load grenade launcher, which is going to be beautiful with Witherhoard. Now for our second column, we have one with frost, killing breeze, enhanced ether generator, fill the Revenant, and rapid impacts. Now we've already gone through each one of these already, but these are your classic artifact mods that lean into those origin traits. We also have one that leans into Shade Stalker armor, literally giving us increased damage against Scorn when wearing 4 pieces of armor, and the rapid impacts increasing the reload speed of grenade launchers. For our third column, we have Wind Chill, Crystalline Converter, Total Carnage, Power from the Pain, and Trace Evidence. Lots of great stuff here, guys. And again, all of these have boosts. These boosts are like secondary traits found on these artifact mods. And you get these boosts by consuming potions with Ida. Now, I'm sure some of you are noticing the theme here from the stasis weapons, granting you frost armor with Wind Chill, from Crystalline Converter, where your melee hits create stasis crystals, each of these having boosts. Total Carnage, which is going to be an interesting one that we're going to cover in our builds, leans into those finisher builds. Power from the Pain allows you to gain Devour simply by getting rapid final blows against weakened combatants. And then Trace Evidence. Here we start to see some things leaning into Arc. Rapid precision hits or rapid final blows on targets affected by Jolt or Blind will generate Onic Traces. Now for our fourth column, we have Armor of Aramis. We also have Hail the Storm, Debilitating Wave, Concussive Reload, which is essentially Breach and Clear, and Retinal Burn. Lots of stasis synergy here. Debilitating Wave, another good artifact mod to lean into those finisher builds. Concussive Reload was always a good one for grenade launchers, as it essentially applies weaken on bosses, champions, or when you break a combatant shield. And the Retinal Burn leaning into arc weapons, allowing your arc precision hits to consume an armor charge and blind targets. Now our fifth column, the 2 artifact mods that we missed the other day include Brain Freeze and Supernova. Brain Freeze states that frozen combatants become surrounded by chilling fog, which slows combatants that aren't already slowed. Weapons with Dark Ether Reaper origin perk deal more damage to frozen combatants. Now Supernova states that picking up a Void Breach causes your next source of void damage to create a large weakening pulse. Now, if you saw the other day when we were showing off the new exotic there for Warlocks, Brain Freeze is going to be so good with that exotic, considering that's such a lockdown exotic and you're literally freezing everything. But pretty much every other exotic is going to be perfect for this as well. Now, Supernova, I haven't got to try it out yet. That one's an interesting one because it creates a large weakening pulse simply by picking up a Void Breach, which is going to be very easy considering the other artifact mods that we have seen. Now, our other artifact mods in this column include Conductive Cosmic Crystal, Served Cold, and Kinetic Impacts. Now, Kinetic Impacts is literally like kinetic tremors, where sustained damage with the grenade launcher causes the target to emit shock waves that damages nearby targets. Served Cold gives you benefits for either picking up stasis shards or picking up void breaches. And then Conductive Cosmic Crystal really leans into your arc and void abilities in any weapons with your Dark Ether Reaper origin perk. They essentially do bonus damage to targets that are affected by a stasis debuff. This, of course, is going to stack with Brain Freeze even further, considering that weapons with Dark Ether already deal more damage to frozen combatants. So coming off the mods, there are 2 main themes, stasis and grenade launchers, with a splash of void and arc in there too, which takes us to our list of weapons we believe are going to be very potent with this lineup of artifact mods. The first weapon that really jumped out to us is, of course, Anarchy. Anarchy may be insane next season. You've got Kinetic Impacts and Concussive Reload. These mods will allow Anarchy to stun unstoppable champions, weaken them, and even tack on more sustained damage. You see, that sustained damage requirement is something that Anarchy could easily fill. And I don't know what the cooldown of this is going to be, if there even is going to be a cooldown. Most likely there will be, but considering the duration of Anarchy and the tick damage that it does, I can't help fantasizing about placing 2 Anarchy shots on a high health target, then walking away and watching them as they get hit with Anarchy's tick damage, the weaken effect, the kinetic tremor damage, and any ads that actually get close to that target, they also get killed. It was as if Bungie was targeting Anarchy with this lineup of artifact mods. Now, the next weapon I want you to consider is Salvation's Grip. Now, I know many people not that crazy about it. I personally love it because, well, it's cool. and it got a rework. It's a stasis weapon. It's essentially a wave frame, but it lays down these stasis crystals, and it has massive stasis energy. This exotic takes advantage of so much. From the bottom up, it's going to make use of rapid impacts for that faster reload. It's going to dip into Hell the Storm for the more damage from its crystals. Brain Freeze is also going to proc here. Conductive Cosmic Crystal for that extra damage on abilities. And then lastly, Kinetic Impacts itself. Keep in mind, Salvation's Grip already stuns unstoppable champions. So it's going to be able to dip both on the unstoppable front and on the overload front. The question I have is that Crystal Shatter damage going to count as sustained damage? Which almost sounds too good to be true. Can you imagine the Stasis Crystal shattering? It somehow procs Kinetic Impacts, which would then release another wave of AoE damage, shattering even more Stasis Crystals. And as someone who has used Salvation's Grip in all in-game content, I would love to see this kind of synergy. Now the next weapon on the list, Ager's Scepter. Ah yes, the exotic that gave me more hell than any other exotic in the game. This weapon though, does everything. It comes with Ager's Call, where final blows of this weapon generate a slowing burst around the defeated targets. It's got an exotic catalyst that's an alternate weapon action which drains your super energy, overflows the magazine, and empowers the beam with bonus damage. Also giving you the ability to slow and freeze targets until the magazine or super energy runs out or the weapon is stowed. The only downside to Ager Scepter is that, well, it's a trace rifle. And DPS-wise, trace rifles are a bit lacking. Ager Scepter, though, and its catalyst really does amp this weapon up enough to compete. And the synergy it's going to have here with artifact mods are amazing. Everything from Wind Chill for those easy frost armor stacks, Brain Freeze for even more AoE slow, although it probably doesn't need it, Conductive Cosmic Crystal for that increased ability damage. You can even make use of Hell the Storm. I truly believe that there is going to be a moment in this episode where we're going to say, hey, Prismatic is great, but I think I'm going to start singling out a stasis-only build for that full synergy. Now, our next stasis exotic that I truly feel deserves a spot here is Wicked Implement. Now, this is historically an unpopular weapon to run. It behaves very similar to Ager Scepter with the ability to slow and freeze on demand. It arguably has even easier access since you don't need to burn your super from maximum performance. This exotic also spawns stasis crystals with no investment, allowing everyone to benefit from Crystalline Converter and Served Cold for spawning stasis crystals with our melees and giving us some class energy. Then as a scout rifle and a precision weapon, it'll have the ability to counter all three champions. This is thanks to Anti-Barrier Scout plus the slow and freeze. It'll also benefit from Wind Chill for that extra survivability since it hits crits very easily. It'll take advantage of the same lineup that Ager's does, from Brain Freeze to Conductive Cosmic Crystal, Hell the Storm, although I will say in Wicked's case, it doesn't really need any of these boosts since it naturally spawns stasis crystals. The point is that Wicked Implement, despite it collecting dust for many of you, is going to be worth a second look in this next episode. Now, our next weapon on here is a bit of a weird one, Divinity. Divinity is an arc weapon that applies a similar debuff to Weaken, and it's all about hitting crits. Now, the reason why we're looking at Divinity is that specifically, it will be able to benefit from Retinal Burn, allowing it to stun overload champions and unstoppables simultaneously. It should also interface with Trace Evidence to spawn in Onyx Traces. If these artifact perks consider Divinity's Weaken as true Weaken, then we also may be able to use things like Power from Pain to have Infinite Devour. Listen, I know Divinity has kind of fallen from grace for a lot of people outside of a few niche scenarios, but the ability to intrinsically stun overload champions on top of the debuff and the easy crit spots, we're at least going to see how Divinity works in this environment. Now, with some more stasis investments, we gotta talk about Conditional Finality. This exotic shotgun will directly interface with our stasis perks on that first shot, and then it's going to be able to stun both unstoppables from Shatter alongside ignitions, then anti-barriers with anti-barrier shotgun. Currently right now, Conditional Finality performs quite well in PvE, and this artifact is going to make it even more viable. I know a lot of people look at this shotgun as more of a PvP shotgun, and don't get me wrong, it's fantastic for PvP, but for my PvE players, you may want to consider it. Now back to some arc exotics. I think Prospector is going to be a dark horse here for a number of reasons. Alongside the grenade launcher perks for weaken and extra damage, Prospector is having a change where it now spawns 3 powerful cluster bombs on detonation, dealing substantially more damage per shot. They're also removing the remote detonation, making it deal its damage up front. Now this weapon wasn't the worst by any means. It also has built-in chain reaction. Guys, with the changes hitting Prospector, even though it's been looked at as a DPS option for damage phases, Prospector is about to clear entire rooms. Again, I know these are all changes listed on paper, but so far, things are looking very good for this weapon. Now another arc heavy that I myself have come out and said would never be meta. And listen, I don't want you to believe I'm saying it's going to be meta now, but DARCI may actually see some use. You see, this exotic has the ability to apply Jolt intrinsically. This means that its main perks will directly interface with Retinal Burn, as well as Trace Evidence. Now, the synergy is going to be there. Is the damage though? Guys, we might be in a scenario in which DARCI might be worth your consideration, with the buffs that are coming to sniper rifles, including a damage increase to minors by 60%, majors by 75%, mini bosses by 35%, and champions by 25%. Sniper rifles are a weapon type folks are going to have to consider, and with the ability to apply Jolt to targets, dealing AoE damage, that extra splash damage will tag up minors extra hard with that 60% damage buff. Now, I still maintain that eventually DARCI needs to get looked at and potentially moved to a special weapon instead of a heavy. Now, our next weapon on the list is one that was one of my favorite when synergizing with Arc, that being Delicate Tune. This super unique Arc fusion rifle is all about Onyx traces, as well as jolting. This is actually a very forgotten fusion rifle, and it's so unique, with the ability to shoot bolts horizontally, changing up your shooting patterns when aiming down sights. When we start to synergize it with our artifact mods, more specifically Trace Evidence, to get even more Onyx traces to spawn, which directly synergizes with Delicate Tune. You see, collecting an Onyx trace overcharges the weapon's next shot, allowing you to jolt targets on hit. So again, the more Onyx traces you get here, the better, which is exactly what we're going to be getting from the artifact mods. Now, for our last special Arc weapon, this one is actually getting direct focus in Revenant, that being Diris. Fellas, this one is looking hot. We've got some big buffs coming in the shape of a 33% damage increase to direct hits, a more intuitive projectile, making it easier to land your shots, and the ability to spawn moths off of 2 direct hits. Let me just say Diris is such a good grenade launcher. It's exotic catalyst, which gives you Berserk Rush, essentially enraging the weapon while your character is amplified. Landing final blows of the weapon creates a loyal moth, which will then seek out nearby targets, detonate, damage, and even blind them. And you can shoot this weapon in full auto. It is essentially the same exact shooting pattern that our Hive Knight boomers also use. What's so beautiful about this change, though, is of course the improvement to its consistency. The ability to create moths off of 2 direct hits and not have to land that final blow. At base, this exotic is looking really good. Then when we sprinkle in things like Trace Evidence and Concussive Reload, Diris is going to be able to spawn in Onyx traces, it's going to be able to weaken, and your moths that you're spawning in are going to be able to take full advantage of those things. Now on to some primary weapons. One I'm going to be looking at, guys, even though we just came out of a few artifact mods that were very good for auto rifles, I'm still going to be looking at Centrifuse. You see, as a precision weapon, Centrifuse can double dip into both blinds on sustained damage and kills thanks to Retinal Burn. Centrifuse can also start building into Onyx traces with Trace Evidence for even more Arc synergy. I'm not saying Centrifuse is going to be meta, but it does have the synergy there. Now, personally, the Arc primary weapon that I think is going to be worth a second look at is Symmetry, a scout rifle that I know many have forgotten about. A couple reasons why Symmetry is looking pretty good. First, we have anti-barrier scout rifle for this season. We also have Trace Evidence, which is going to synergize here, as well as Retinal Burn, and then also the upcoming buff to Symmetry's ease of use. Essentially, Bungie is making the change where it now gains a stack of dynamic charge on kills in addition to precision hits. Guys, I want Symmetry to be meta. I know I'm biased right now, but I would love a scenario in which I'm like, yo guys, break out thy symmetries. Let's fart! Now, our last Arc weapon on the list is one you have to respect, our dear old Acrius. This heavy shotgun doesn't necessarily have much artifact synergy besides anti-barrier shotgun, but it is a very good option. And considering we don't have anti-barrier shotgun come around very often, I want to use Acrius. Considering this weapon is going to be constantly overcharged, building into that damage, proccing Trench Barrel with its exotic catalyst, there are ways in which you're going to be able to synergize with Legend of Acrius to get the most out of this weapon. We've utilized it still, even in the current sandbox, but the artifact mods we have here in front of us are only going to amplify it more. Now on to our last exotics that I would recommend for Revenant. We have 2 breach load grenade launchers. The first being Witherhoard. This is still a great exotic despite it not being too popular right now. Considering you're going to have access to Weaken on Demand and Anti-Overload, Witherhoard is going to absolutely see a surge in use. At the end of the day, Witherhoard is a weapon that you can fire and forget about. It can tack on extra damage against heavy health targets. It can continue to clear ads and lock down different zones. It's a weapon that's only going to be better this season. Now, our final exotic on this list is none other than Fighting Lion. Now, I know it's not the only primary grenade launcher in the game now, thanks to Atlanthanium, but it is getting a buff. Bungie mentioned that Fighting Lion will now apply Volatile on direct hits. That may seem like a small, subtle change, but when we pair that with the Weaken on hits from Concussive Reload and Overload grenade launcher, launcher. I'm personally going to try to give it a go. Granted, the last time I used Fighting Lion was when it was bugged inside of PvE, and it was doing like 100,000 damage per shot. It's definitely not going to be at that level of potency, but I do believe its utility is going to go up. Now onto our final weapons, these being our legendaries. Let's start with our favorite heavy grenade launcher inside of PvE amongst legendaries, Edge Transit. A great DPS weapon, guys. It's going to make incredible use of concussive reload as well as kinetic impacts, giving it much more lethality without any setup. Many of us know that Edge Transit and GLs in general are fantastic. These artifact perks are only going to make them better, but Edge Transit puts out some of the highest DPS in the game. You got that bait and switch roll, especially with that Envious Assassin combo. Edge is only going to be better. Now I know you may be thinking, Cross, what about rapid fire grenade launchers? Caraxes and GLs like it are getting a 7% damage buff. Look, I'm not going to say they aren't good. We're going to definitely damage test once these things go live, but I do believe Edge Transit is still going to be king. Now next in line is another favorite of mine, Lost Signal. Now if your reason for not using Witherhoard is because it's an exotic and it takes up your exotic slots, then look no further. Lost Signal is a legendary stasis breach loaded grenade launcher with a unique aerial denial frame. It has the ability to spread out AoE damage. It has a number of good perks, and with it now having the ability to stun overload champions, it's now going to always be overcharged. Now it's not as potent as Witherhoard, but it's one of the best weapons for topping off that prismatic meter for darkness. And if you're looking for the gun roll, personally I find auto-loading holster and One for All to be fantastic. You could spread out that AoE damage, you could tag up multiple targets, and boom, now you got a 35% damage buff on top of the overcharged damage buff. Now our last special grenade launcher is kind of an old one, Lingering Dread. I mainly only bring this one up just in case you're an old returning player. Look through your vault, you might have it. This is from the Duality dungeon, and it's a stasis grenade launcher, and it has access to roles like Ambitious Assassin and Chill Clip. Now the latter perk is mainly why I have it here. Honestly, I recommend all weapons that have Chill Clip, considering the stasis synergy coming this season. So things like Deliverance, Critical Anomaly, Lingering Dread though, with Chill Clip, intrinsically can already stun overload champions, and that's due to its slow effect. However, you do miss out on that overcharged damage. There's a pretty good synergy though here with Lingering Dread and our artifact mods. However, I do believe it's going to be short-lived considering we're going to be getting a double fire stasis grenade launcher that also has access to Chill Clip. So we'll see how that plays out. Now lastly, the weapon I want to really vouch for here that was a phenomenal choice this past season is Corrasion. This is an arc pulse rifle in the heavy burst frame archetype. It boasts the highest primary DPS, even considering their 10% DPS nerf that they're about to receive in this next episode. But on top of its stellar performance, it has a fantastic roll, that being Volt Shots, which can stun overload champions, combined with perks like Eddy Currents. I know you may not like Eddy Currents, but guys, give it a try. Bungie did a rework to it, and I really like it. Now, despite Corrasion being very bad to me inside of PvP, here in PvE, it made up for it. This coming up season, it will have the ability to stun unstoppable champions. It will synergize with Trace Evidence, with Volt Shots, spawning in even more Onyx Traces, which is going to be great for topping off abilities. This was already a good gun, guys, and these perks are going to make them that much better. Those are our weapons we recommend for Revenants. For those wondering, how do you get some of these weapons? Well, some of these are old ones, but for the weapons this past season, I will have guides listed down below that you can click on for things like Corrasion and others if you're looking to farm them up right now. I do want to also mention that there's going to be a big focus on the new weapons, considering they're not only new, but they also have access to the new perks. Some of those perks look very juicy. If you're interested in what those weapons are and those redacted perks, feel free to check our video out, the weapon rolls we got to play with. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.